"Don't eat that," the boy shouted, and the billionaire froze when she found out why. Welcome to this story. Get ready to embark on a thrilling, suspenseful, and mysterious journey where a simple sentence can change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and let us know where you're reading from. We're excited to have you along for this incredible ride. Now, let's dive in. The steady hum of announcements echoed through the subway station. Commuters hurried along, weaving through the crowd, rushing to board before the doors slid shut. In the vastness of the platform, Eleanor Whitmore stood out effortlessly. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if the world itself were waiting for her. The sharp-cut gray suit hugged her frame perfectly, exuding an air of power and elegance. A pair of designer sunglasses obscured her eyes, while her golden hair, pulled into a sleek bun, framed a face devoid of emotion. She always walked like this, independent, unshaken, allowing nothing and no one to stand in her way. Beside her, Harder, Nathan Carter, her ever-loyal, razor-sharp assistant, kept pace at just the right distance. His grip on the tablet was firm as he skimmed through her schedule, ever efficient. "The Midtown meeting has concluded," he reported smoothly. "You need to be at the investment conference by 7:30 to review your speech." "Any reactions from the board?" Eleanor's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. "Some murmurs about the South American expansion. A few members are concerned about environmental regulations, but nothing serious." Eleanor smirked. Unfounded worries. Laws weren't obstacles, they were merely guidelines that could be adjusted. A well-placed strategy, a discreet meeting or two, and a few well-aimed contributions, and things would move along just fine. Today, she had chosen the VIP subway over her private car. The city's gridlock was unbearable, and she had no patience to waste time idling in a slow-moving limousine. The VIP train was designed for the elite, luxurious seating, private work tables, and personal attendants. She stepped onto the train without so much as a glance at those around her, indifferent to the stares. Admiration, envy, resentment. None of it mattered. Nathan pulled out her chair and she sat down, flipping open her tablet. Her schedule was packed, stock figures scrolled endlessly across the screen. The train began to glide forward. Silence enveloped the car, broken only by the occasional station announcement, the rustling of documents, and the soft clink of coffee cups on polished tables. A perfect environment for focus. But then, a small voice pierced the quiet. "Mom, this train is so fast. Can it fly into the sky?" Eleanor arched a brow. A young black boy, no more than 8 or 9, sat a few seats away. His short curls framed a round, curious face, his wide eyes gleaming with excitement. His clothes weren't new, but they were clean. He looked like he'd never been on a first-class train before. Beside him sat a woman, Camilla Brown. She wore a plain sweater and an old, faded scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. There was exhaustion in her posture, but her voice remained soft and warm as she answered her son. "No, sweetheart, but it moves really fast, like a steel snake underground." The boy giggled. "Then, can it go to Africa? Or maybe to the moon?" Camilla smiled. "Not the subway, but an airplane can." Eleanor's lips curled ever so slightly. Children always had the strangest questions. Had she ever been like that? When was the last time she'd thought about something so simple? Nathan cleared his throat, snapping her back to reality. "Would you like to dine on board? The chef has just introduced a new seafood dish," he suggested. "That sounds interesting," Eleanor replied. Within minutes, the server arrived with a tray, setting it down with a practiced grace. The dish was exquisite, imported shellfish from the southern seas, delicately plated with a slice of lemon and drizzled in an aromatic sauce. Eleanor picked up her fork, ready to take the first bite, but just as she raised it to her lips, a sharp, piercing scream shattered the quiet of the train car. "Don't eat that!" The entire carriage froze. Every head turned toward the young black boy. He was trembling, his face had gone pale. His wide eyes, filled with terror, were locked onto her plate. Camilla went rigid beside him. She grabbed his arm hastily, her own face drained of color. "Theo, you can't shout like that! I'm so sorry! I'm so sorry!" she stammered. But Eleanor wasn't looking at Camilla, she was looking at Theo. Slowly, she set her fork down, her gaze steady, unblinking, waiting. "Why did you say that?" Her voice wasn't angry, but there was a chilling seriousness to it. Theo's small hands clenched around his mother's sleeve, but his eyes never left the plate. "Because My dad. His voice quivered. Uh, my dad ate something just like that, and he got sick. Really, really sick. Camilla gripped his hand tighter, her voice tense. Theo, that's enough. But Eleanor didn't look away. She studied the boy, her sharp mind already racing ahead, and then, quietly, she asked, How sick? Theo swallowed hard, his voice shrinking to a whisper, but still clear. My dad said, a company dumped chemicals into the ocean. The shellfish got poisoned. He ate them. And then he never got better. Eleanor suddenly found it hard to breathe. A company. Chemicals. Contaminated seafood. Flashes of memory surged forward. A report, a warning she had skimmed over. A project long buried beneath the sheer weight of acquisitions and mergers. A subsidiary lost in the vast empire under her control. Beside her, Nathan was already moving. He pulled up his tablet, fingers flying over the screen. It took him only seconds to find a classified internal document. He scanned the file, and his face turned deathly white. Wordlessly, he handed the tablet to Eleanor. The letters blurred for a moment as she read, her stomach knotting tighter with each word. Then she felt it, the sharp, suffocating grip of realization. She knew. She knew exactly what she had just stumbled upon, and she knew with chilling certainty it could destroy everything she had built. Eleanor's eyes remained locked on the tablet screen. A cold shiver ran down her spine, as if the entire train car had suddenly darkened. The words before her blurred, then pieced themselves together into a grim picture. A truth she was never meant to see. Nathan was still standing beside her, but he said nothing. His expression was tense, his eyes scanning the confidential documents he had just uncovered. The air in the cabin grew thick, weighted with something unspoken. Only the faint murmurs of passengers broke the silence. Eleanor swallowed dryly, her gaze freezing on a bolded line. Quality Control Report, Atlantic Fisheries Project. Seawater samples indicate chemical contamination exceeding regulatory limits, toxic substances accumulating in shellfish, high health risk to human consumption. A sharp pressure clutched at her chest. This wasn't speculation, it wasn't baseless rumor or empty accusation. This was documented proof, gathered by her own company's subsidiary. Eleanor vaguely remembered this project. It had come across the board's desk years ago. A subsidiary of Whitmore Industries had acquired a seafood harvesting zone, branding its products as premium delicacies for the international market. Then reports of contamination had surfaced, declining water quality, poisoned marine life, growing complaints, and she had ignored it, a minor issue, not worth her time. But now, a trembling 8-year-old boy sat in front of her, telling her that his father had died because of those very same shellfish. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She lifted her gaze, locking eyes with Theo. He still clutched his mother's sleeve, his round, dark eyes wide with fear. Camilla held her son tightly, as if willing him to stop speaking. But it was too late. Theo's words had taken root in Eleanor's mind, each syllable cutting through the armor she had built around herself. She turned to the mother. What happened to his father? Camilla's hollow eyes slowly lifted to meet Eleanor's. A long pause followed before she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He's gone. The short, simple sentence struck Eleanor like a blow to the chest. Her pulse slowed. She didn't know what she had been expecting, but it wasn't this. Theo's tiny fists clenched as his lower lip trembled. He tried. He really tried, but no one helped him. The hospital said. His voice wavered. They said there was nothing they could do. The entire car was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitmore felt something unfamiliar. She was no stranger to dealing with scandals, no stranger to brushing aside insignificant numbers on a spreadsheet. If something didn't directly impact profit, it wasn't worth her concern. But now, a life had been taken, and the one responsible, however indirectly, could very well be her. She took a deep breath, but the heaviness in her chest remained. She could feel the weight of the stairs pressing into her as if the entire train car was waiting, watching to see what she would do. But she couldn't say anything. She couldn't deflect. She couldn't deny. She couldn't excuse herself, because this wasn't just an accusation. This was the truth. The subway hurtled through the underground tunnel, each subtle vibration traveling through the seats. Eleanor remained motionless, her sharp gaze fixed forward, though something in her expression had softened, as if clarity was slipping through her grasp. A slow, simmering anger coiled within her chest, not fury at being accused, but anger at herself for not seeing this sooner. Nathan. Her voice was low, steady, but carried undeniable weight. Nathan stiffened, momentarily caught off guard, but his professional demeanor returned just as quickly. Yes, ma'am. I want every file related to this project. She paused, then added, immediately. Nathan blinked, clearly not expecting this reaction. Do you want me to pull up internal records? Or... No, Eleanor cut him off. Her voice was absolute. I want the truth. She turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing like embers in the dim train car. Not the polished reports, not the sanitized PR briefings. I want to know exactly what that subsidiary did, who made the decisions, and how many lives were affected because of it. Nathan hesitated for only a second, then gave a firm nod. I'll get on it right away. Eleanor turned back to face Theo and Camilla. The boy still clung tightly to his mother, while Camilla met Eleanor's gaze with a look that was both wary and exhausted, as if she couldn't quite believe someone like Eleanor Whitmore could care about this, and Eleanor couldn't blame her. If she were Camilla, she wouldn't believe herself either. But there was one thing Eleanor knew with certainty. This would not be another fleeting headline. She had ignored too much, dismissed too many numbers, buried too many reports under the weight of quarterly earnings. But Theo was not a number. His father's death was not a footnote in a 100-page document. For the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore felt like more than just a billionaire. For the first time, she felt human. And maybe, just maybe, it was time she took responsibility. The train rattled gently as it glided through the pitch-black tunnels. The low, grinding hum of the wheels against the steel tracks filled the silence, a haunting undercurrent to the weight pressing down on every soul in the cabin. Eleanor Whitmore sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the tablet screen. The numbers, the reports, once meaningless figures, now sliced through her thoughts like a razor. She read through the quality control report again, a document that had once crossed her desk years ago, one she had never bothered to care about. Seawater samples from the West African coastal fisheries show heavy metal contamination exceeding regulatory limits. Cadmium, mercury, and arsenic levels are 3 times higher than the World Health Organization's safety standards. High health risks associated with consuming shellfish from this region. Eleanor felt her breath slow. This report was from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, one of her company's subsidiaries had taken over that stretch of ocean, turning it into a large-scale seafood harvesting operation, marketing high-end delicacies to exclusive restaurants worldwide. And 3 years ago, one man, Theo's father, had eaten those very same shellfish. And he had died. Eleanor closed her eyes. A strange, unfamiliar sensation swelled in her chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't guilt. It was awareness, a raw, unfiltered realization that she had allowed this to happen without ever once considering the true consequences. She turned her head slowly, her eyes falling on Camilla Brown and Theo. The boy was still watching her, but his gaze, those deep, dark eyes, no longer held the innocence a child his age should have. Instead, they carried a fear he should never have had to bear. Eleanor swallowed against the weight in her throat. She took a slow, deep breath and then set the tablet down on the table. Mrs. Brown, she said, her voice low, steady. I want to know everything. Everything about your husband. Camilla looked up, studying Eleanor as if searching for cracks in the mask of composure she wore. She sat in silence for a long moment, and then, as if making a final decision, she nodded. My husband's name was Robert Brown. Camilla began. Her voice was even, but Eleanor could hear the quiet ache woven into every word. He was an environmental engineer. We lived in a small coastal town where most people made a living from fishing. Camilla paused, her fingers gripping the fabric of her coat as if unearthing memories she had buried deep. When your company took over the fisheries, the locals started noticing something was wrong. The water changed. The seaweed started dying. The fish began showing signs of disease, but no one said anything because your company was too big, too powerful. Who in a small town would dare stand up to a billion-dollar corporation? Eleanor clenched her fingers slightly. She hadn't made those decisions herself, but she knew what Camilla was saying was true. This was exactly how her subsidiaries operated. Robert refused to stay silent. Camilla's voice grew darker. He started testing the water, sampling the seafood, and he found the truth. The shellfish were poisoned. A sharp shiver ran down Eleanor's spine. He tried to warn people, Camilla said. He sent reports to the authorities, wrote letters to health organizations, but no one cared. She let out a short, hollow laugh, one entirely devoid of humor. You know, Mrs. Whitmore, when an ordinary man tries to stand against a billion-dollar corporation, he's nothing but an ant. No one listens. No one cares. Eleanor said nothing. Robert couldn't save anyone else, Camilla continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. But he never thought he'd become the victim himself. A sharp, unbearable tightness gripped Eleanor's chest. He never imagined that one day he'd eat the very same shellfish. Camilla lowered her gaze to her hands as if reliving a memory she wished she could erase. He started having headaches, constant, unrelenting pain. He felt dizzy, nauseous. We took him to the doctor, but no one could tell us what was wrong. They said it might be stress, maybe diet related. Her fingers curled into a tight fist, trembling slightly. It wasn't until things got worse, until he couldn't walk properly anymore, until his brain started shutting down from heavy metal poisoning, that we understood. Eleanor's throat felt dry. He was gone 6 months later. Camilla's final words barely made a sound. The doctors said it was an irreversible neurotoxic condition. The train car was deathly silent. Eleanor felt as if something heavy had settled onto her shoulders, pressing down with an unbearable weight. Then Camilla met her eyes head on. Do you know what it feels like to lose someone you love? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Did she? No. She had never loved anyone enough to know what loss truly felt like. But she knew what losing control felt like. And right now, she felt like she was losing something. Something important. Something she wasn't sure she could ever get back. I'm sorry. The words left her lips before she could even think them through. Camilla stared at her, an unreadable emotion flickering in her eyes. Does sorry change anything? She asked, her voice devoid of hope. Eleanor had no answer. Could an apology change the past? No. But could it change the future? Maybe. She inhaled deeply, her spine straightening. When she looked at Camilla again, she was no longer just Eleanor Whitmore, the untouchable billionaire. She was simply a person. I'm going to fix this. Her voice was firm. Camilla raised a skeptical brow. Do you really think you can? Eleanor clenched her hands into fists. I don't think, she said slowly. I know I will. The subway tore through the tunnels, its dim lights casting fleeting shadows against the glass, reflections sliding past Eleanor Whitmore like ghosts. She had never felt this before. This cold wave of unease slithering down her spine, this sharp realization that she had let things spiral out of control for far too long. Camilla Brown sat across from her expression steady, but her eyes still held doubt. She didn't believe Eleanor. And Eleanor couldn't blame her. She was used to whispers, to rumors, to criticism. She had learned long ago to ignore them, because in her world only money and power held value. But now, sitting here, staring at the raw pain of a woman who had lost everything, she couldn't turn away. Her own words, I will fix this, still lingered in the air, weighty and unshaken. Camilla tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing as she studied Eleanor, searching for sincerity. Do you really believe you can change this? Camilla asked, her voice no longer filled with anger, but still heavy with doubt. People like you, people in power, you don't fix things. You silence them. Eleanor curled her fingers slightly. She couldn't deny that Camilla had a point. How many times had she watched CEOs make hollow promises? How many times had she personally signed off on corporate responsibility initiatives that were nothing more than empty PR campaigns? How many times had she skimmed over reports, stamped approvals, and never looked back? But this time was different. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It wasn't just a report. It was a child staring at her, terrified. It was a man she had never met, a man who had died, and his death could have been caused by decisions she had allowed to happen. Eleanor leaned back in her seat, her piercing gaze steady on Camilla. I understand why you don't believe me, Camilla said nothing. But I'm not saying this so you'll believe me, Eleanor continued, her voice firm. I'm saying it because I know I will do it. Camilla held her stare but remained silent. Eleanor turned to Nathan. Her assistant had been unusually quiet throughout the conversation, but she could tell he was tense, his eyes still glued to his tablet screen, as if he was processing the storm that was about to come. Nathan. He flinched slightly before straightening, snapping back into his usual professional composure. Yes, ma'am? I want the full internal records on the Atlantic Fisheries Project. Eleanor's voice was slow, measured. Not the cleaned up versions. I want the truth. Nathan hesitated. Ma'am, if we release the full truth, it could. I know. Eleanor cut him off. And I don't care. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp as a blade. I don't care about shareholders. I don't care about the company's image. I only care about one thing. She exhaled, her voice like steel. How many people were hurt because of this? Nathan studied her for a long moment before he slowly nodded. I'll have the report ready as soon as we arrive at the station. Eleanor leaned back into her seat, but there was no relief in her chest, because she knew what came next wouldn't be easy. The train made a stop at an intermediate station. A handful of passengers stepped off, others boarded. But inside the VIP cabin, the tension remained. Theo Brown, the boy who had stopped her from eating, sat curled up beside his mother, his small hand gripping the fabric of her sleeve, as if letting go would make everything disappear. Eleanor watched him. Your father was a good man. Theo blinked, momentarily startled by her words. Did you know that? She continued. You're the first person in years who's had the courage to tell me that I was wrong. Theo didn't answer, but his fingers twitched slightly, as though he was turning her words over in his mind. And suddenly, Eleanor remembered something. She had been a child once, just like Theo. There had been a moment, one small, insignificant moment, that had shaped the way she saw the world. She had been sitting in a fine dining restaurant with her father, a ruthless businessman, when she noticed a homeless man standing outside, peering through the glass. Why doesn't he have any food? She had asked. Her father had simply laughed, his voice devoid of sympathy. Because the world isn't fair, Eleanor, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Now, looking into Theo's eyes, she realized her father had been wrong. She could change it, and this time she would. No one spoke for the rest of the journey, but as the train neared its final stop, Eleanor turned to Nathan. I want an emergency meeting the moment we arrive at the office, she said. Gather the entire board and set up a press conference. Nathan hesitated, his brows furrowing slightly. You want to announce something? Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them again, there was no hesitation left. The truth. She stood, grabbed her handbag, and prepared to step off the train. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitmore was no longer just a billionaire. She was finally becoming human. New York was as relentless as ever. Towering skyscrapers glittered under the city's lights, streets pulsed with endless streams of traffic, and life moved forward at a pace that allowed no hesitation. On the top floor of Whitmore Industries, Eleanor Whitmore stood before a vast glass window, looking down at the world she had once believed she controlled completely. Today, everything felt different. Nathan Carter entered the room, his grip firm on the tablet in his hands. The press conference is scheduled to begin in 1 hour. The media has been alerted, but I think you should prepare for some serious backlash. Eleanor gave a slight nod. What about internal affairs? Nathan hesitated. The board is in disarray. Some members are already discussing damage control strategies, and a few want you removed. Eleanor let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. I expected as much. Nathan hesitated again, then said carefully, Are you sure about this? If you go through with this, if you tell the truth, there's no going back. Eleanor turned away from the window, facing him fully. Her sharp gaze held no doubt. Nathan, how long have you worked for me? His spine straightened. 12 years. And do you believe I'm doing this for PR? Nathan studied her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, a deep, knowing breath. Something in his eyes shifted. No, he said. Not this time. Eleanor nodded. Then let's proceed. An hour later, the press room was packed. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled furiously, and microphones were adjusted. The room buzzed with anticipation, reporters ready for a statement that would either be another corporate excuse or a moment that would shake the industry. Eleanor walked onto the stage, dressed in a flawlessly tailored black suit. The aura of power still clung to her, but this time it wasn't the cold and distant kind. This time she was standing before them to face the consequences of her own actions. She placed both hands on the podium, meeting the gazes of the hundreds of people waiting. Then she spoke, her voice clear, steady, and unshaken. I am standing here today not to protect my reputation, but to tell the truth. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Cameras zeroed in on her, reporters whispering in hushed excitement, sensing something unprecedented. Whitmore Industries has made mistakes, she continued. We failed to properly oversee our subsidiaries. We allowed negligence, greed, and recklessness to infiltrate our systems. The silence in the room became heavier. 3 years ago, a subsidiary of our company invested in a seafood harvesting operation in West Africa. We ignored clear warnings of environmental contamination. She paused, her voice dropping. The result? Hundreds of local residents suffered. Some lost their health, some lost their lives. Now the room exploded. Reporters shot up from their seats, hands raised in urgency. Microphones were thrust forward, a chaotic storm of voices flooding the space with rapid-fire questions, but Eleanor simply raised a hand. The room fell silent. She didn't evade, she didn't deny, she faced the truth. There is a boy named Theo Brown. Her voice was measured, but something in it ran deeper, something raw, something real. His father was one of the victims. The press room froze once more. I met him yesterday, she continued, her tone quieter as if recalling the moment. On a subway train. She let the words settle. And he did something that no one else dared to do. He told the truth. Eleanor inhaled, her chest rising with the weight of what she was about to say. That boy lost his father. Her voice did not waver. But I lost nothing. I am still here. I still have power. I still have influence. But I can no longer ignore this. A silence stretched across the room, heavy and unbroken. Then Eleanor lifted her gaze to the cameras, speaking not just to journalists before her, but to the entire world. I am making a commitment today, she declared. Whitmore Industries will take responsibility. We will conduct a full investigation. We will compensate the families affected. We will change the way we operate. Her voice sharpened, steel beneath every syllable. And most importantly, I will never let this happen again. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, the camera shutters erupted. A flurry of furious scribbling, fingers flying across keyboards. History was being written in real time. A billionaire admitting her own mistakes, a corporation taking accountability. But Eleanor wasn't thinking about headlines. She wasn't thinking about damage control acts. She wasn't thinking about PR strategies. She was thinking about a boy on a train, a boy who had lost his father. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitmore had truly changed. As the press conference concluded, Eleanor stepped out of the building where a sleek limousine waited at the curb. But just before she could slide inside, a small voice called out. Mrs. Whitmore? She turned. Camilla Brown stood there, with Theo by her side. The boy looked up at her, his dark eyes still holding a trace of hesitation, but this time there was no fear. Eleanor crouched slightly, meeting his gaze. You were right, she said softly. Theo blinked, surprised. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. Thank you for telling the truth. Theo didn't say anything at first. Then, slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. He handed it to her. Eleanor took it. It was a child's drawing, sketched with colored pencils, a subway train, a blonde-haired woman standing at the door, and a small boy holding his mother's hand. Above the picture, scrawled in unsteady handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for listening." Something warm flickered in Eleanor's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She hadn't just listened with her ears. She had listened with her heart. She looked up at Camilla. The woman still carried the weight of all she had lost, and there were wounds that words alone could never mend. But in her eyes, there was no longer hatred. Eleanor knew she still had a long road ahead. Mistakes like hers couldn't be undone overnight. But today, she had taken the first step that truly mattered.